Good morning, guys. A hearty Austrian and Bavarian servus again to the Wolf Summit and all guests here offline and also in the online audience. We're gonna have a keynote from Singapore, how to analyze economic risks in Web3 ecosystems. And I keep it very short and simple. I'm gonna leave a bit earlier now, and I give you a few introductions or a short overview of the last day, also what's happening today after this keynote. But I want to keep it short and simple and introduce now Lisa Tan, the CEO and founder of Economics Design. So listen to her, enjoy the keynote, and see you later. Thank you.
From the sausage with cheese after the opera, to the always look good waterproof mascara. From ice cream and dumplings perfectly combined, to a being inside you, the unconscious mind. From the jumping and dancing self-tan teen, to the sewing machine. From a place between art with the world's biggest bedroom, to my Wi-Fi is good, thanks the spread spectrum. From really crispy schnitzel and the schmaltz it was dipped in, to this place of preparation. You know, fitted kitchen. From many bright colours and the paintings with the boobs, to the 3 minutes daily, toothpaste in a tube. The inventions from Vienna, this original blend, it has always been there, from crazy to grand. This is Vienna, where future is tradition. From fiacre to e-bike, from Palm House to Tech Hub, from coffee house to co-working space, from Lipizzana to unicorn, from vision to reality. With the business agency Vienna.
Hi, and welcome to this session on how to analyze economic risks. Today, that's what we want to understand and want to learn. What is economic risks? How do they come into your Web3 protocol? And why should you care about that? So before we begin, just want to give a quick agenda of what we're going to go through in this session. First, we're going to understand the various kind of risks in Web3. Economic risks are not the only thing that you see. You hear a lot of things about smart contract risks, where you have smart contract auditors in place. What are the other risks are there in this space that we should talk about and we should also be aware of? The second thing is, once we set the stage of the different kind of risks in place, how do we get started with understanding economic risks? Then who should care about economic risks? Why should you care about it? Are you an investor? Are you a protocol developer? Are you a user? Why should you care? To what extent should you care? And how should you care about economic risks? Then we talk about economic sustainability and stability analysis. The whole thing about defining risk and uncovering risk is to understand how stable or how volatile the system is. So how should you go about figuring this thing out? And lastly, how can you learn more about designing economics? So with that, let's begin. There are 3 different types of risks in Web3, and you probably heard of 2 of them. The first one is financial risk. You hear financial risk quite often. In fact, the entire implosion of 3AC and also a lot of these different DeFi and CeFi protocols is because they didn't take into consideration of the various kind of economic risks and financial risks in place. What is financial risk? This is really your traditional financial models and risk models, understanding your VAR, your value at risk, understanding all these other different things that you see in traditional finance. So usually people who are taking care of financial risks, they are doing treasury management, and they're typically also used a lot in DeFi protocols, especially when you're doing lending borrowing or minting stable coins using collaterals at the back How do you calculate that kind of risks? And how do you correlate it to defining yields in your protocol? Typically, these people come from traditional finance, and this area and this financial risk area has been researched for years now, which is fantastic, right? We can take these lessons and we can apply them in Web3, and you can even extend it to infrastructure models and GameFi. So we have financial risk. If you want to take a little bit of an analogy, the easiest way is to think about accounting and audit. So someone is doing accounting and someone is auditing the financial risk and financial health of the company. So we have that. We have that in the traditional world. We also have that in the digital world. The second kind of risk that is more specific to the digital Web3 world is technical risk. And you probably heard about that. You have smart contract auditors. You have people writing code and executing everything by code. Because of that, we need to check if the code is written right, correct? Just like you have accounting and audit, you also have people who create code and people who audit the code. So you have a lot of companies doing that, and they check for bugs, they check for how well it's being created, how well it's being done, how well it executes. Why? Because in the smart contract world, with all these EVMs available and all the other platforms and all the other layer 1 and layer 2s available, everything is executed, or most of the things are executed by smart contract, which is fantastic because you remove the human element, you allow machines to do that because machines are much better at executing sometimes. That being said, there's a big risk available, right? With every convenience, there's always a risk in place. The risk is that we're executing everything by code. We need to make sure that the code is written correctly. We need to make sure that the code is done well. We need to make sure that there is no weird thing in the code where someone can go in and hack the system, which happened many, many times. So technical risk is something that's very unique to digital systems. This is not just Web3. Anything digital, you have this risk component, technical risk. And this is typically related to security of executing economic transactions in the protocol. Make sure that we are not hacked and make sure it executes well. You can think about it in terms of cybersecurity as well. You also have technical risks in that area. So you have people creating code, you have people auditing code. Now, we come to the third area of risk. This is a very, very new area, and this is, it's very specific to Web3, very specific to systems where we get to build brand new ecosystems, brand new economic systems. And what is that? That is your economic risks. How does this come about? See, we are building brand new economies, brand new systems, brand new markets. And with the help of DLT, blockchain technology, and this ledger technology, we get to build brand new economies sitting on top or leveraging this technology. That's fantastic. That's beautiful. It's almost like we get to create a brand new universe or a brand new country, create it from scratch. We create new markets, which is good, There are a lot of perks and beautiful things about that. The problem, though, is that we've seen a lot of economies exploding, economies reaching hyperinflation or reaching depressing deflation that the system just doesn't run anymore. Nobody wants to spend in the system. So what should we do? This is where we need to start looking at economic risks, economic audit, economics due diligence. How do we audit the market structure, the economy that we have created? This is not just DeFi. This is infrastructure. This is DeFi. This is GameFi. This is anything Web3 related. As long as you're building your own economy, you define the rules in the economy, you define the monetary rules, your fiscal rules, your economic policies in place. You need to audit this system. I've been speaking to a lot of different smart contract audit firms. And they say that yes, sometimes they do look at that. But again, their specialization is code. How do you execute code? How do you write smart contracts? How do you make sure that smart contract is aligned to the different kind of economic policies in place? Auditing those economic policies, it's a whole different skill set. And today, that's what I want to talk to you about. We're going to focus on economic risk. And I will tell you that this is something nobody really thinks about initially. Because people think about, we're just going to create an economy and we're just going to put some inflation rates in place. We're going to put some interest rates in place. We're going to release some tokens. It's all going to be okay. You know what? Once you design new things, once you create new rules in place, there are not just primary impacts and effects about this. There are a lot of secondary and tertiary implications that we need to think about. This will impact the economy in the long run, and we need to make sure that if they are impacting the economy badly, how do we prevent that from happening? Or how do we make different changes during the different economic cycles to maintain a healthy economy in this system? It's kind of like going to a country and telling the government, hey, your COVID policies are good or your COVID policies are not good because of this, and that. Because it affects the economy in this way. These are the trade-offs in terms of healthcare costs or human life costs. How do we measure these things? How do we quantify the risk? And how do we figure out what is the best decision for this economy? The way you look at COVID laws or any monetary policy even for Singapore, where I'm from, versus Vienna, where you guys are at, it's going to be very different because you have different markets, different structure, different economic policies, different economic systems. So we need to take time to really understand what is the economic structure of this economy, of this system, be it country or ecosystem. And then we can figure out, okay, this is something that's very risky. We need to deal with this right now. Or this is something that, it's not very risky. Maybe we look back at this in the next 6 to 12 months. Or this is actually a good model and there are no foreseeable risks in the near future. It's very important to look at that. So with that in mind, then the question is, with the financial risk, we have, regular auditors coming in to audit the system. There's a methodology to that. So we can apply that methodology. In financial risk, we have our VAR, your value at risk mechanisms and math models. We can just apply them, tweak them a little and put them in the Web3 space. In our smart contract audit, in the technical audit, it's been 6 years. I think the industry has more or less figured out what is the best methodology, best practices for doing this. What about economic risks? We don't exactly have a benchmark for that. Nobody goes around different countries and having a big book saying that, oh, your country is running wrongly, or oh, your country is running right. You have different people with different philosophies saying that your country should run in this way, your country should run in that way, but there isn't one fixed answer or fixed methodology of what is the best way. So how do we even get started with figuring this thing out? How do we even get started with saying that this is the better way, this is the wrong way, this is bad risk, this is good design? This is where we need to go all the way back to first principles, first foundational principles of how we even design ecosystems in the first place. When we know how to design ecosystems, then we know how to figure out and calculate risks. Now, your question will then be, all right, first principles, what is the first principles that we're talking about? Very good question. Where do we see first principles? We see first principles in physics, right? What are the first principles of building this world? Gravity is gravity. You can be 100 kilograms, you can be 50 kilograms. Gravity is gravity. If you fall downwards. You don't fall upwards. That's a rule that's fixed to everyone in this ecosystem. So when we are building new countries, new ecosystems, new universe with a token-based ecosystem, what is the first principle that we're talking about? I want to share with you what the economics design framework is. And from there, we can understand how do we do economic audit. The framework is very simple. It has 3 different pillars: market design, mechanism design, and token design. Again, this is the pillars for us to build a robust, self-sustaining, self-financing economy. That means it's not based on speculation, it's not based on investors' money coming in, it's not based on marketing, but actual value creation in your economy. So what is market design? Pillar number 1. Market design is the design of a market. Who are the participants in the space? How are they transacting? How often should they transact? Why should they transact? How do we get more people in this space? How often do people join the system? How do people trade with each other? How do people decide who to trade with each other? These are everything around the market. Defining the market. Who is in the market? What do they trade? Why do they trade? This is market design. So pillar 1 is market design, defining the market. Pillar 2 is mechanism design, defining the rules of the game, rules of this system. What is your governance systems like? How is decision being made? How are decisions being resolved? How are people voting? How are you allocating resources? How are you allocating tradable resources, non-tradable resources? How do people negotiate with each other? How do people decide to trade? How do you aggregate information outside into your ecosystem? Are you using oracles, or are you allowing people within your system to make decisions or to bring information in? How do you structure your economy? What are the rules in the economy? This is everything we talk about in the second pillar, mechanism design. What are the mechanisms, rules in this space to allow your market, your people, to come together to trade? Then you realize we have not talked about tokens at all. And this is where the third pillar comes in, tokens. Everything we talked about is people in the space, rules of trading. Now, they need to trade something, correct? What do they trade? They can trade tokens. Tokens are not just assets, like Bitcoin or Ethereum, but tokens are anything that represent value. So it could be an NFT. It could be a fungible token. It could be a security token. It could be a utility token, a governance token, or a token that's even not tradable at all. It just represents value within your system. And people trade with each other. You can trade it directly, or you can trade it through point system. That's a form of trading. So you have token design, and token design is the design of the asset that you have in your system. So we have market design, who is in the system, mechanism design, the rules that you have to agree on, like sign, say I agree to terms and services, then you join the system, and then token design, the assets within the system. With these three different pillars in place, we can come up with a very good economy. We can define the value that's being traded in there. We can figure out what are the rules to trade. We can look at why should people trade? How do people trade? How often do they trade? Are we talking about velocity? What are they trading? Are you talking about value accrual? How does value get accrued to this asset, this token? There are a lot of things that we can build and design to create a very robust and sustainable economy. Again, thanks to DLT, we get to build new economies, just like building a brand new universe. We get to design everything from scratch, which is fantastic. But when you design everything from scratch, you need to evolve and improve and iterate on the model to get to where we are today. We went from dinosaurs to human beings today. There's a lot of iteration, a lot of evolution in process. And how do we do that? We learn from mistakes. To learn from mistakes, to learn from evolution, to adapt to new changes, we need to first figure out how to measure the current design that we have. We need to be able to audit the system. We need to be able to do due diligence. We need to be able to understand how to improve the system. And so this is what we want to talk about. With that in mind, how do we look at economic risks based on the design of this economic design framework? Let's take a look at some examples. In market design, what do we look at? We look at the market, the macro market as well, the legal and jurisdiction risks, your regulatory risks, your technological risks. You're building on a specific chain. So what chain are you building on? The security of this chain. Maybe it's not hacked by your system, but hacked by the system below. And then also understanding your community. Who are your economic agents? How do they come in? How do you attract them? How often should they come in? It's not just gamers you want to attract. Are you doing casual gamers? Are you looking at hardcore gamers? Are you looking at semi-casual gamers? Are you looking at sophisticated institutional DeFi users? Or are you looking at retail DeFi users? In mechanism design, we look at governance. We look at how do you implement change? How do you look at defining decision-making? What's your decision-making mechanisms? In financials, we look at economic transactions. What are the rules to allow for economic transactions? Is there KYC in place? Or are there any rules and barriers to allow or disallow, prevent economic transactions to happen? And in token design, we look at the various tokens in place. How many token types are there? NFTs versus fungible tokens, or fungible tokens and non-tradable tokens, or all token types will be in there. What about the various kind of economic value that's being generated? Every time people trade, they are generating economic value. If you don't trade in your market, there is no economic value. Then a trade happens because someone is producing something, another person is demanding it, and you trade. And so what is the economic value that is being traded, and how does it evolve, and how does it accrue value to the token? And when we look at financials, we look at your cash flow, we look at your trading volume, we look at all these different things that's related within your economy. From there, we can slowly build up the economic risk. I don't want to give you a list of specific stuff to go into because it's not going to be relevant for every project. If you are an infrastructure, or if you're an Oracle, or if you're, let's say, something like the Graph, or if Dune starts to make a token, versus a DeFi protocol, a stablecoin, an options trading platform, or a GameFi protocol, hardcore game, casual games. These are all very, very, very different economic models. When you have different economic models, you have different ways of defining risk and analyzing risk. So I don't want to restrict your imagination to figure out what kind of economic risks, not right now. So I want to give you something a bit more high level to start thinking about. Okay, if we think about defining, creating this market of our ecosystem, what are the risks that could be? How should we think about the risk? How should we calculate the risk? How should we measure them? If we're creating rules to trade and transact, or rules of this entire ecosystem, what should we think about? How should we analyze the risk? What potential risks can there be? If we're looking at token design, how do we look at the various risks for various token types? Economic risks for various kind of token types. How do you start thinking about that? I want you to start brainstorming and thinking about that. I can give you some answers, but it defeats the purpose because we're still in an evolutionary phase, right? I can give you some push to figure out how to start thinking, which is start from the first principles. Market design, mechanism design, token design. From these pillars, what kind of risks do we foresee and how do we start quantifying them? So another way to think about risks is, who are you? We talk about market design. The market is not just the community. The market includes the protocol developers, includes the protocol owners, includes the investors, the retail investors, the institutional investors, the VCs, the active users. Everyone is part of the market. Another way to think about it is, based on who you are in the system, what level of designing of the economy you're in, how involved you're in, you look at economic risks in a different angle as well. So I would say the three key stakeholders, going from the least involved in designing the economy to most involved in designing the economy, the least involved will be your active community. They're your users. You and me, we're users of the economy, ecosystem. We trade DAI, we send DAI, we use ribbon finance, we use different games, we use Chainlink as oracles. We're active users. We can vote to affect the design of the economy, but we are just the active users of the system. The second type, with the mid-level, it's more your VCs and investors. They can have some say in the design process, but they're not the one designing themselves. And lastly, you have your protocol creators and decision makers. They create the entire protocol. They create the rules of the entire protocol. So very active in designing the economy. With that being said, they all care about economic risks. And they care in different dimensions and domains and perspectives of economic risks. With the active users, the community, you should care about the economic sustainability of this economy, of this ecosystem. And what you want to care about, you want to think about, does this economy evolve its own structure to balance between long-term and short-term sustainability? Short-term profits, long-term sustainability. As a user, I want to make sure that this economy will continue to exist in the next 5 years because I want to use it. So I want to care about the economic sustainability. Does the economic rules allow the economic sustainability to flourish? Are there different kind of economic risks involved? The second type will be your VCs and investors. Here, you should care about the self-financing ability of this ecosystem. Can the token economy grow and develop, and ultimately sustaining the entire growth of the economy purely just by retained earnings from the ecosystem? Again, this comes from an investors and VCs perspective. If you're constantly pumping money in for the ecosystem and economy to be sustainable, that is not going to be a sustainable economy. There's going to be pretty high risk, high economic risk. From that perspective, start thinking about the different ways to look at economic risks. Here you can think a little bit more about the financial risk aspects, but also remember, how do we implement them? How do we change them? How do we shape the right kind of financial system, financial models in the system? And lastly, most importantly, it's a protocol creators and decision makers. Here, you care about the organization and hierarchical system within your ecosystem, because everything we're moving towards is decentralization. Maybe not 100% decentralization, but you're going to decentralize some stuff. So what is the organization looking like? What is the hierarchy looking like? Can the economy optimally balance between the various value flows within and across the subsystem to maintain economic viability? That's going to be key. As you give up more economic power towards decentralization, what are the economic risks in place? Is it still going to be self-sustaining, self-financing, and self-organizing in the system? So that's another perspective of risk to think about. And we look at these three different core market participants to create the various kind of risks in place. Okay, now I've given you the background, given you the different types of things to think about. I want to share some answers with you. What are the different risks categories that we have figured out? And I want you to start thinking about them in those areas. Again, because they're not always relevant to all protocols in the space. Something that's relevant to Chainlink might not be relevant to X Infinity. Something that's relevant to X Infinity might not be relevant to MakerDAO. So they're very different, but they're the categories that we can start brainstorming and thinking about. So for risks, for economic risks, we divide into two: systemic risks and idiosyncratic risk. You have that in the financial market. Nothing is new. A lot of things we get inspired from the current markets that we live in. Systemic risks are things that you cannot control. It's from the big system. The macro picture, the big system, things that you cannot control. Here, we look at the macro market. If the world is going through recession, high inflation, stagnation, there is nothing that you as a DeFi protocol or GameFi protocol can do. But of course, you can make different changes to your system to reflect or reduce the various risks in place, but changing the protocol doesn't change the entire market and resolve everything. So that's in systemic risk, we have number one, the market risk, the macro market. Second, the user risks. This will be a bit more of the user behavior. Sure, we can influence user behavior, we can incentivize certain behaviors, but we can't control that. If we can control that, that's quite a dystopian world that we live in. So we can influence these behaviors, but we can't control that. So that's one of the risks in place. And thirdly is the technical risks. As I mentioned, say we're building on another protocol that you don't have any control of. Or maybe everything is running on AWS cloud and you don't have control over that. So you can figure out ways to mitigate the risks, but you don't have any control over that. So you can't change them in the economics design of your system. So those are systemic risks. It's good to quantify them. I would say that from an investor's perspective, it's better to figure that out. But the cool thing, the fun thing that we want to look at are the idiosyncratic risks. Idiosyncratic risks are things that you can control. You can design them and update the design in the economics of your ecosystem. And here we have 5 different areas. First one is the protocol. Second, the economic parameters. Economic parameters will be the design that we talk about. Protocol is the core business, almost like the token business model we're talking about. Third is your governance structure. How do you make decisions? How do you decentralize the decisions? How do you punish bad behaviors? How do you execute all these decisions? Your financial risks. So how does the token accrue value so that it's self-financing? And your liquidity risks. So how do you allow for enough liquidity in the secondary market or the primary market to allow for transactions to happen, especially if your token is a medium of exchange to allow for exchange to happen. So these are the 8 key risks that we look at. We have systemic and idiosyncratic. Within them, we have market, user, and technological risks. For systemic, in idiosyncratic, we look at protocol, economic parameter, governance, financial, and liquidity risks. Together, we have 8 different kind of risks that we look at when we quantify economic risks. Once we can quantify that, once we can measure that, then we can change and improve and then measure the improvement from there. When we can measure, we can improve. And that's what all of us are talking about. There is no one-size-fits-all model. It's all about improvement, iteration. Once the market changes, the mechanism will change and the tokens need to be updated. So how do we measure that? How do we make changes? The good thing about Web3 is that you've got data availability. Fantastic, beautiful. Now we need to use data for something. And we need to use the data for good. We need to use the data to make good changes and improvements to the protocol itself so that it becomes self-sustaining, self-financing, and self-organizing. That's what we want to do. We want to create very robust and sustainable economic systems so that people like you and me can continuously use this protocol and not that in 3 months, in 3 years, the protocol just disappears. We're creating lasting systems that last for a long time, that's sustainable, that's robust. So hopefully that gives you some ideas and starting points and some answers to figure out how do we calculate and analyze economic risks in the system. I want you to start having this conversation in all the meetings that you have, because economic risk is something that's so important. If your economy is completely flawed, you can have good financial risk management and good smart contract audit to execute them. But if your economy is not sustainable, it's going to disappear in 6 to 12 months, then why do we need to care about all the other things? If we don't get economic sustainability right, nothing else matters. And I want you to start having this conversation because the space is mature enough to start having this conversation. How do we look at economic risks? How do we do token due diligence? What is token due diligence? How do we do economic assurance? How do we do economic audit? This is a conversation we need to start to have. If you're interested in more conversations like this and more lessons and case studies and stories and theories in place, go check out our content on YouTube. Everything is free on YouTube. We have our academy as well if you're interested in that. But YouTube is a fantastic free start. Go to youtube.com/economicsdesign. You find that, or you can scan the QR code to get access. I'm Lisa, the founder of Economics Design, and we design economics of the system. We want to share a lot of the knowledge that we have learned throughout all the consulting, throughout all the research that we have, so that you don't make the mistakes that we have done, and we can grow this entire space together. And we can really use blockchain and DLT to make the future a better place. Hopefully that answers a lot of your questions. Until then, I'll see you next time.